special, isn't it? This is my, I've been writing all day and essentially pulling my hair out hairstyle. Lots of people recently have been asking me questions about my writing and like my writing process and how I write and how I plan novels, and I did a writing Q&A and then I looked at the video and realised that writing Q&A was done 2 years ago. So here's an update. What do you do when you have a great concept but you're not entirely sure how you'd wrap up the narrative at the end? I think one of the biggest misconceptions about writing and about authors is that because they're creative people, all of these ideas and writing comes really, really naturally. Writing's hard. Writing's really, really hard, and I've watched lots of interviews with different authors because obviously I'm a big fan of books and a big fan of writers and a big fan of finding out other people's process of writing. And there's so many authors that say the hardest part about writing is writing. So many writers love storytelling, but actually getting that story out of their heads and onto their computers, notebooks, whatever they choose to write on, that's the really difficult bit. So when you get an idea for a story, when you come up with a really good concept that you're happy with, the next part is working on it. You've got to sit there and work and figure out all of the plot points and all of the characters and whether new characters get introduced halfway through and why they get introduced and what each of the characters' motive is and how that motive then pushes the story along, and of course then what the big climax is and finally how it ends. All of that is just hard work and planning. How do you stay motivated while you write? Motivation is, I think, the hardest for me. If you only ever write when you feel motivated to write, it's gonna take you a decade to write a book. So what you need to do is write even when you don't feel motivated to write. You need to sit down in front of your laptop, in front of your notebook, and just start. There's kind of no other way around it, and eventually you will get into the rhythm and the flow of things, and if you don't, you just try again tomorrow. But if you wait to be motivated, the book's never gonna get written. What music do you find usually inspires you a lot when writing? I can't listen to anything with lyrics because I end up writing the lyrics. I like listening to the sound of rain. I know that sounds really stupid, and I think I've said that before, but there's one specific track that's from Naturescapes music called Thunder, Wind and Rain, and it's the sounds of thunder, wind and rain, but there's like this nice piano sort of music over the top of it, and it's 6 minutes long, so I just have that on loop. How much do real life events of people from your life inspire/influence your stories? Quite a lot, I'd say, but you've got to find the line between making your characters just complete and exact replicas of people that exist in real life and using people who exist in real life and real life experiences to make your characters seem like real people. How do you manage to not get sidetracked when writing? There's this meditation app that I've been using recently, and there's like 5-10 minute things here and there. One of them is a focus meditation, which I think is like 5 minutes, but it tells you the difference between the dog mind and the lion mind. Now the dog mind, I always think of Doug from Up. You know, when he's like having a conversation and he goes squirrel because he sees a squirrel and he gets distracted instantly. That's the dog mind, which is what you do when you get sidetracked by something and you're coming away from what you should be focused on. And the lion mind is staying focused, and if there is something that comes along that tries to distract you, you kind of acknowledge it, but then you go, right, and now I'm going back to this, because lions don't get as distracted as easily as dogs. And so I've always had that in mind ever since I listened to that, and now if something comes along to try and distract me, I'm always like, be a lion, be a lion, I want to be a lion. What are the hardest scenes to write? The hardest scenes to write are the ones that are close to home. If there's something painful or hurtful that you once lived through in your life that you want to put into your writing because it's cathartic and because it makes for a really good story, you then have to keep reliving through it. It might take a few days to write that scene, and then you've got to go back and edit it, and then you've got to go back and copy edit it, and then you've got to go back and reread it again before the final thing actually gets published. And so those scenes are the hardest to write because you have to just keep reliving through that painful thing in order for the book to seem more real and be finished. Does releasing your fiction novels give you a little sense of loss that some authors and artists feel when their characters are officially out there and available to or belong to someone else? I always feel a sense of relief when my books finally get released into the world, because when they're a secret, and when I'm, you know, working on them for so long, it almost feels like they become a sort of burden. It feels like I have hostages. It feels like I'm keeping my characters captive and they're constantly screaming, let me out, let me out, let me out. And so when I finally do let them out, I feel relieved more than anything. I don't ever feel lost because they're all still there. I'll always have a copy of the book near and they're still my characters. It just so happens that they're everyone else's now as well. What kind of research do you do and how long do you spend researching before the beginning of a book? I always find it hard to figure out how much research I have to do until I'm writing and I know exactly what I need to research. There's things that you know to research from the beginning, like with When the Curtain Falls, half the book is set in 1952, so I knew I would have to research the 50s and clothing and food and brands and like pop culture references like movies and TV and that kind of thing. One of the first things I did for research for When the Curtain Falls was get in touch with my old stage doorman from Les Mis, from the Queen's Theatre, called Mark Donovan, and I just asked him to give me a rundown of what his job entails every day, and whether it's changed from when he first started to now, and I asked if he knew what was required of people who worked on stage door back in the 50s, just in case he could shed some light on that. I also sent a few texts to my nan, because who better to give me an idea of the 50s than someone who was around in the 50s, so thank you very much, Nan, for that. But there's research that I think you can't anticipate until you get there and you suddenly get to writing a bit and you're like, oh, I really need to know this. I really need to do a bit of research before I go into the scene, otherwise I'm gonna get everything really wrong. And finally, once you're done writing a novel, do you know what happens to the characters after the last page? No. I like that I get to be with them for this part of their story, and whatever happens after the final page has closed is up to them. Thank you very much for joining me on day 26. I had to check then. I hope you found this vaguely interesting. I really hope you like When the Curtain Falls when it's finished and it comes out in July. You can pre-order it now. I will leave the links below. And thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget to donate. Goodbye.